Welcome to Books and More, your home for transformative ideas, powerful summaries, and life-changing lessons from the world's most influential books. Today, we dive into Rich Dad's Guide to Investing, Who Took My Money? Rich Dad, Poor Dad series, Book 7 by Robert Kiyosaki. This book reveals why most people lose in the money game, how the wealthy think differently, and what it takes to become a smart, powerful investor. If you're ready to build financial intelligence, break free from limiting beliefs, and learn how money truly works, this is the perfect place to begin. Introduction: Who took my money? For many years of teaching finance, I've constantly been asked a familiar question. I have $10,000. Where should I invest it? It sounds simple, yet answering it properly is anything but simple. Everyone is different, different circumstances, goals, financial knowledge, and levels of risk tolerance. What I might do with my $10,000 may be completely different from what's right for you. And if I were to honestly explain how I could turn $10,000 into millions, most people would immediately respond, "That doesn't work where I live," or "I don't have enough money," or "Isn't there an easier way?" This desire for an easy answer is exactly what caused millions of people to lose their savings during 2000-2003, when the stock market collapsed and trillions of dollars vanished. They followed the same old advice: save money, invest for the long term, diversify, without understanding the real rules of the money game. I didn't write this book for people who want quick riches or comforting advice. I wrote it for those who want control of their money, who want to understand the game of finance, and who want their money to work for them. You don't need to get rich overnight, but you must learn how to play, and how to play on your own terms instead of handing your financial future to someone else. A young woman once asked me, "Why does high return matter so much? Isn't happiness more important?" I handed her a newspaper article showing that Americans' greatest fear wasn't death, it was running out of money before they died. That's why I call money a game. Each of us enters the money game around age 25 and finishes around 65. Those 40 years are divided into 4 quarters. If, by the end of the 4th quarter, you don't have enough to live on for the rest of your life, you enter overtime, working not because you want to, but because you have to. The truth is that most people are losing this game, not because they're not smart or hardworking, but because they follow financial advice designed for the poor. And for salespeople. Most families are overwhelmed with student loans, taxes, mortgages, and car payments. By the time they begin thinking seriously about their future, they're already running out of time, energy, and opportunity to change direction. I don't want you to become a victim of this game. I want you to understand why the rich get richer and why most people get poorer the harder they work. The rich play a different game. They don't save and hope the market will rise. They don't hand their money to strangers and wish for good outcomes. They don't rely on safe advice recycled for decades. They study, they learn, and they take control. Once you understand the rules, money stops being a source of fear and becomes a tool. You'll know how to avoid depending on the market, how to stop worrying about the future, and how to avoid waking up one day asking, "Who took my money?" This book is your first step toward taking back that control. You absolutely can win if you're willing to shift your mindset, learn what must be learned, and start playing the game the right way. Chapter 1: Ask a Salesperson. From the earliest days of my financial journey, people constantly asked me, "I have $10,000. Where should I invest it?" And this chapter begins with why I rarely give a direct answer. It's not because I lack knowledge, but because everyone's situation, goals, and financial mindset are different. Yet there's one universal truth. When you don't know what to do with your money, countless people know exactly what they want to do with it, and most of them are salespeople. I still remember my first so-called investment at age 18. A former student from my academy returned, confidently explaining why we should all buy mutual funds. He told us to invest for the long term, buy and hold, diversify, words that sounded impressive, but were nothing more than a polished sales script. He wasn't teaching me how to invest, he was selling me something. Like millions of people, I mistook that sales pitch for actual financial wisdom. When I told my rich dad what I had done, he didn't scold me. Instead, he asked, "What did you learn from the investment?" I had no answer. I wasn't investing to learn. I was investing out of impatience and ignorance. Rich Dad explained that the biggest mistake wasn't losing or making money. It was investing without understanding. By blindly trusting a salesperson, I had simply handed my future to someone whose goal was to earn a commission, not to make me financially smarter. Rich Dad then pointed out that the world is full of investors who behave like gamblers. They buy something because someone told them to, or because everyone else is doing it, or because it sounds sophisticated. They don't analyze, study, or plan. They hope. And hope, he reminded me, is not a strategy. A true investor learns from every decision, while a gambler waits for luck to save him. He compared my approach to that of a person entering a casino, placing money on the table, and walking away, trusting the dealer to handle the bets. That is how most people invest in mutual funds, stocks, or retirement plans. They hand their money to strangers and assume those strangers care more about their future than they do. Rich Dad emphasized that before anyone asks, "Where should I invest?" they must first ask, "What kind of investor am I, and what do I actually know?" If you rely on sales pitches, you will always be a customer, never an investor. A salesperson's job is to sell you something. An investor's job is to understand what they're buying and why. By the end of the chapter, I realized my mistake wasn't the mutual fund itself, but the mindset behind my decision. I wanted quick answers and easy solutions. I didn't want to invest time before investing money. And that impatience nearly guaranteed I would repeat the same mistakes again. Rich Dad's final lesson in this chapter is clear. If you don't take control of your financial education, someone else will take control of your money. The first step to becoming a real investor is learning to distinguish between advice and a sales pitch, and refusing to let impatience turn you into someone else's customer. Chapter 2. Ask a Farmer. Chapter 2 begins with a lesson Rich Dad taught me long before I understood its full meaning: the difference between a beef cattle rancher and a dairy farmer. At first, the comparison seemed strange. What did cows have to do with investing? But as Rich Dad guided me through the idea, I realized it was one of the clearest illustrations of how different types of investors think. When I was 16, Rich Dad took his son and me to visit Parker Ranch in Hawaii, one of the largest cattle ranches in the United States. There I saw the harsh reality of raising beef cattle. After years of feeding and caring for the animals, the rancher earns money only once, when the cattle are sold, usually to become meat. It didn't matter how healthy, strong, or productive the cattle had been. Once sold, they were gone forever. The rancher had to start all over again with a new herd. That was the one-time payoff model. A few months later, Rich Dad took us to a dairy farm. Early in the morning, I watched cows being guided into the milking station. These animals weren't raised to be sold. They produced milk every day. Their value wasn't in a one-time payout, but in repeated, consistent cash flow. As long as the cows were healthy and the operation managed well, the dairy farmer earned money day after day, year after year. That was the ongoing income model. Only years later did I fully grasp the point. Most investors behave like beef ranchers. They focus entirely on capital gains, hoping an asset will go up in value so they can sell it for a profit. They chase rising stock prices, booming real estate markets, and hot trends. Their financial success depends on timing the market and selling at exactly the right moment. If the market turns against them, they lose everything they were waiting for. In contrast, Rich Dad wanted me to become a dairy farmer in the world of investing, someone who invests for cash flow, not hope. An investor with cash flow assets doesn't rely on market conditions or speculation. Whether the market rises or falls, they continue to receive income. Cash flow gives stability, control, and long-term security. Rich Dad also warned that many people invest emotionally and impatiently. They want quick results, so they buy assets they barely understand, hoping for a big score. But real wealth is rarely created from gambling on price movements. It's created by patiently building streams of income that compound over time. A dairy farmer mentality allows you to withstand recessions, downturns, and market noise. A beef rancher mentality leaves you vulnerable to every fluctuation. By the end of the chapter, I understood exactly what Rich Dad meant when he said, "Don't raise beef cattle in your investment portfolio, raise dairy cows." In other words, don't depend on capital gains, depend on cash flow. The more I embraced this philosophy, the more clearly I saw why the rich get richer even when markets crash, and why most people lose money even when markets rise. Chapter 2 is ultimately a lesson about choosing the right mindset. If you want financial freedom, focus on assets that work for you every day, not assets that pay you only once. Chapter 3. Ask a Banker. Chapter 3 begins with a powerful lesson Rich Dad wanted me to learn early. If you want to understand money, you must understand how banks think. Banks do not operate on hope, predictions, or emotions. They operate on risk control, collateral, and cash flow. So one day, instead of explaining it to me himself, Rich Dad took me to meet Jim, a banker he trusted. When I asked Jim whether he would lend me money to invest in mutual funds, the same funds a salesperson had pushed on me earlier, Jim politely declined. He explained that banks never lend money for investments they can't control or secure. Mutual funds, stocks, and similar assets offer no collateral. If I lost money, the bank had no way to recover it. That moment opened my eyes. The investment I thought was safe wasn't safe enough for a bank to touch. Rich Dad told me that bankers are some of the most conservative investors in the world, not because they fear risk, but because they manage it. They look for assets backed by something real, something they can hold if the borrower fails to pay. That's why banks love lending on real estate. Property can be repossessed. But they avoid the paper assets most people pour their life savings into. The contrast taught me that many investors put their money where even a bank would refuse to lend. Rich Dad also used this meeting to teach me about the importance of financial statements. Banks don't care about your job title, degrees, or dreams. They care about your income, expenses, assets, and liabilities. Jim didn't ask me where I wanted to invest. He asked me how strong my financial foundation was. A banker's perspective is brutally honest. If you can't manage a small amount of money wisely, they won't trust you with a large amount, especially borrowed money. This chapter also exposes a painful truth about amateur investors. Many put money into assets they don't understand, without a plan, without protection, and without control. Banks would never do that. Banks never say, "I hope this works." They lend based on math, collateral, and proven performance. Rich Dad wanted me to adopt the same discipline. Never invest in something you can't control or analyze. Another lesson came when Jim explained the difference between saving and using money. Most people let their money sit in accounts earning low interest, while banks use that same money to lend and earn far more. Banks never let money sleep. They put it to work constantly. Rich Dad emphasized that if I wanted to become wealthy, I needed to stop thinking like a saver and start thinking like a banker, someone who moves money strategically and protects it intelligently. By the end of the chapter, I understood why Rich Dad brought me to the bank. He wanted me to see that real investors behave more like bankers than gamblers. They don't rely on hope, trends, or sales pitches. They rely on numbers, control, guarantees, and solid exits. They make money because they understand risk, not because they avoid it. Chapter 3 ends with a clear lesson. Think like a bank if you want your money to be safe, productive, and consistently growing. Chapter 4. Ask an Insurance Agent. Chapter 4 begins with a lesson Rich Dad wanted me to understand deeply. Professional investors do not avoid risk, they insure against it. To teach me this, he took me to have lunch with Dan, an insurance agent he trusted. Rich Dad wanted me to see that in the world of investing, insurance isn't an inconvenience or an added cost. It's a strategic tool that separates amateurs from professionals. As we talked, I realized how differently Rich Dad viewed insurance compared to most people. For many, insurance is something they buy reluctantly, a bill they wish they could skip. But for Rich Dad, insurance was a built-in safeguard. He insured every real estate deal, every business venture, and every large investment, not because he feared losing, but because he planned to stay in the game long enough to win. That mindset alone changed how I thought about risk. Rich Dad asked me whether the mutual fund salesperson who once advised me explained any downside risks, or whether he promised me the average annual 9% return without offering any guarantees. The salesperson never mentioned how to protect myself if the market collapsed. He had simply sold hope, not a strategy. That was the first time I understood how vulnerable I had been. I was investing naked, without any protection. From Dan, I learned that all financial professionals deal with risk, but only some manage it well. Banks control risk with collateral. Insurance companies control risk with actuarial science. Professional investors control risk by protecting their capital before they invest. In contrast, amateur investors buy first and worry later. Many even believe good investments require taking big risks. Rich Dad disagreed completely. He believed big risks come from ignorance, not from opportunity. He explained that most amateur investors suffer heavy losses because they do not build safeguards around their investments. No insurance, no exit strategy, no backup plan. They rely entirely on the market behaving the way they hope. Meanwhile, professional investors behave like insurance companies. They calculate risk, control variables, and ensure they never face a catastrophic loss. One of the most important lessons of this chapter is that insurance allows professionals to use leverage safely. Rich Dad reminded me that banks lend on real estate precisely because it can be insured and collateralized. That protection allows them to use large amounts of money with relatively low risk. Without insurance, big opportunities would be too dangerous. With insurance, they become manageable. As we left lunch, Rich Dad summarized the lesson in his usual simple way. Before you invest $1, make sure you know how you'll protect that dollar. He wasn't telling me to avoid risk. He was teaching me how professionals neutralize risk so they can invest boldly without gambling. Chapter 4 ends with a powerful realization. Insurance is not a burden, it is a shield. It frees you to invest with confidence, withstand downturns, and use leverage intelligently. Amateur investors see insurance as an unnecessary cost. Professional investors see it as the foundation that keeps them safe while they build wealth. Chapter 5. Ask the Tax Department. Chapter 5 begins with the truth that most people never fully grasp. Taxes are the largest expense in a person's lifetime, far greater than housing, education, or even healthcare. Rich Dad wanted me to understand that the tax system is not designed to punish the poor or reward the rich arbitrarily. It is designed to encourage certain behaviors. And the behaviors that receive the most rewards are those of business owners and investors, not employees. Rich Dad started by walking me through the 4 quadrants of the cash flow quadrant: employee, self-employed, business owner, and investor. Employees and self-employed individuals pay the highest taxes because their income is classified as earned income. They are taxed before they ever touch their own money. Business owners and investors, however, use structures that allow them to earn, deduct expenses, and then pay taxes on what remains. The difference may seem technical, but in reality, it creates a massive financial divide. He emphasized that most people complain about taxes because they operate from the left side of the quadrant. They try to save a few dollars here and there through tiny deductions, while business owners and investors legally reduce taxes through entire systems of incentives built into the law. For example, a business can write off many of its expenses before taxes, while an employee must pay taxes first and live on what remains. One of the most eye-opening parts of this chapter was learning about depreciation, a legal mechanism that allows investors, especially real estate investors, to deduct a portion of an asset's value each year, even when the asset is actually increasing in market value. In practice, this means an investor can earn cash flow, gain appreciation, and still reduce their taxable income. To Rich Dad, depreciation wasn't an accounting trick. It was a reward given to those who build housing and stimulate the economy. Rich Dad explained that professional investors always study how taxes will affect an investment. They don't just ask, how much money will it make, but also, how much money will it help me keep? Amateurs focus only on returns. Professionals focus on net returns after taxes. That small shift in thinking separates those who struggle financially from those who build lasting wealth. He also reminded me that the tax code constantly evolves, and that's why wealthy individuals always work with skilled accountants and tax advisors. Understanding taxes is not optional, it's part of the game. And if you play the game without knowing the rules, you lose by default. By the end of the chapter, I understood what Rich Dad meant when he said, the tax code is a series of incentives. It rewards those who create jobs, build homes, produce energy, and invest long-term. It offers fewer benefits to those who simply earn a paycheck. Taxes are not the enemy, ignorance is. Chapter 5 closes with a powerful message. The rich don't evade taxes, they understand them. They learn the rules, use them legally, and build wealth within the system. Once you understand how taxes truly work, you stop seeing them as a burden and start seeing them as a tool, one that can either drain your wealth or multiply it, depending on how you use it. Chapter 6. Ask the Lemmings. Chapter 6 begins with a vivid image. The lemming, a small Arctic rodent known for blindly following its herd, even when the herd runs straight off a cliff. Rich Dad used this image to show me how most investors behave. They don't think, analyze, or question. They simply imitate the crowd. And like the lemmings, they often follow trends not because they understand them, but because they fear being left behind. Rich Dad explained that the greatest danger in investing is not the investment itself, it is human behavior, especially herd mentality. During market booms, people rush in because everyone else is doing it. During crashes, they panic because everyone is panicking. In both cases, they are reacting emotionally, not intelligently. They are not investors, they are followers. He reminded me of the market crash of 2000. Millions of people poured money into tech stocks because the herd told them it was the future. Yet few understood what they were buying. When the bubble burst, they lost fortunes. They didn't lose because the companies were all bad. They lost because they acted like lemmings, chasing hype and running from fear without any real strategy. Rich Dad taught me that the professional investor studies trends, not crowds. A trend is like a natural force, slow, powerful, and predictable if you pay attention. Crowds react to trends too late. They buy when prices are high and sell when prices are low. A professional investor, by contrast, enters early and exits before the crowd even realizes the shift. He taught me to look for signals the herd ignores: subtle economic changes, shifts in technology, demographic movements, political decisions, and cultural transitions. These signals form the first ripples. If I learned to see the ripples, I could ride the wave before the masses arrived. Another key lesson of this chapter is that herd behavior comes from fear and laziness. It's easier to follow the crowd than to think independently. But in investing, doing what is easy rarely leads to success. Rich Dad said that if you want to be a great investor, you must be willing to stand alone at times, to think differently, and to act before the masses or after them, but never with them. Rich Dad also pointed out that many conventional investment philosophies, invest for the long term, diversify, buy and hold, are designed more to keep the herd calm than to make the herd rich. These phrases are easy to repeat, easy to sell, and easy to believe. But they don't encourage thought, they encourage obedience. By the end of the chapter, I realized that avoiding the fate of the lemmings requires courage. The courage to question popular advice, to seek real knowledge, and to rely on analysis instead of emotions. True investors observe the crowd but never follow it. They remain disciplined, independent, and committed to reality over opinion. Chapter 6 closes with one powerful truth. If you think and act like the herd, you will get the herd's results. And in the world of investing, the herd rarely wins. Chapter 7. Ask a Gambler. Chapter 7 opens with one of Rich Dad's most memorable warnings. Never count your money while it's still on the table. It's a rule every professional gambler understands, yet one that most amateur investors ignore completely. Rich Dad used this analogy to show me that many people who think they are investing are actually gambling, and the reason they lose is not because the investment is bad, but because they don't know how to manage the game. Rich Dad explained that a true investor must know three things: when to enter, when to exit, and how to pull money off the table while still staying in the game. Amateur investors usually know only one thing: how to enter. They jump into markets because someone said it was a good time, because prices are rising, or because everyone is doing it. But they have no plan for when or how to exit, and no strategy for recovering their capital. Without these, they're not investing, they're gambling with hope. To illustrate this, I described a call I once received on a radio show from a couple who had accumulated $2 million in their retirement account during the booming markets of the late 1990s. Then the market crashed. Following their advisor's instructions, they kept pouring more money in, believing the market would rebound quickly. Instead, their $2 million slowly disappeared until almost nothing was left. They asked what they should do next, but by then it was too late. They had stayed too long at the table. Rich Dad said this happens because many investors behave as if bull markets will last forever. They let their emotions, greed in good times, fear in bad times, guide their decisions. A gambler who doesn't know when to walk away eventually loses everything. The same is true for investors who mistake buy and hold for an actual strategy. Rich Dad never criticized buying and holding itself. He criticized doing it blindly, without understanding market cycles, trends, or timing. One of the most important lessons in this chapter is recovering your initial capital quickly. Professional gamblers always try to pull their original stake off the table as soon as possible. After that, they're only playing with winnings. Rich Dad taught me the same principle. Invest, recover your money, and then let the asset continue to produce cash flow or grow in value. That is how professional investors protect themselves while still taking advantage of opportunities. Amateurs, on the other hand, often leave all their money exposed to every rise and fall of the market. Rich Dad explained that markets, like casinos, run on cycles. There are moments when the odds favor you and moments when they don't. A smart investor learns to recognize these cycles, adapts, and adjusts. A gambler hopes. A professional plans. By the end of the chapter, I understood why Rich Dad emphasized that investing is not about staying in the game as long as possible. It's about staying in the game safely. The winners aren't the ones who never leave the table. They're the ones who know when to step back, secure their gains, and return at the right time. Chapter 7 closes with a simple truth. If you don't learn to take money off the table, the market will eventually take it from you. Chapter 8. Ask Newton. Chapter 8 begins with a surprising idea. To understand investing, ask Isaac Newton. Rich Dad didn't mean literally asking the great scientist, of course. He meant that market trends behave according to natural laws, much like Newton's laws of motion. Every movement in the market, whether upward, downward, or sideways, has a cause, a force behind it, and a predictable pattern if you know how to read it. Rich Dad explained that most investors lose money not because markets are unpredictable, but because they misunderstand the forces driving them. They react emotionally rather than logically. They cling to hope instead of observing reality. Meanwhile, professional investors study trends the way a physicist studies motion. They look for early signs of acceleration, deceleration, and reversal. If you can see a trend the moment it begins, like the tiny ripple on a still lake, you can ride it. If you only recognize it once the crowd sees it, you're already too late. He reminded me that from 1980 to 2000, the market soared with incredible momentum, driven by strong economic trends. Almost anyone could make money simply by participating. But when the trend reversed in 2000, millions kept behaving as if the old momentum still existed. They ignored the shift in force and were crushed by it. Rich Dad taught me that every trend eventually slows, reverses, or dies. The investor who understands this survives. The one who ignores it pays dearly. Another important lesson in this chapter is learning to observe the 5 major types of trends: economic, political, technological, cultural, and demographic. These forces shape the financial landscape far more than daily stock prices or expert predictions. For example, population growth drives real estate markets. Technological breakthroughs disrupt industries. Political changes reshape tax laws. Cultural shifts influence buying habits. None of these changes appear overnight. They start with subtle signals that attentive investors can recognize. Rich Dad showed me that trends are not random waves. They follow patterns, they build energy, peak, and decline. Amateurs jump in when trends are obvious, usually at the top. Professionals enter early, exit early, and let the crowd rush in after them. That difference in timing is one of the biggest separators between winners and losers in the investment world. He also warned me that hope is not a strategy. Many people cling to losing positions because they hope the trend will turn back in their favor. But Newton's laws apply here too. Objects in motion tend to stay in motion until acted upon by another force. If the market trend has changed, hoping won't bring it back. A good investor accepts reality quickly and adapts. By the end of the chapter, I understood why Rich Dad wanted me to learn from Newton. Because investing is a science of observing forces. If you can identify what is pushing or pulling the market, new technologies, shifting demographics, changing government policies, you can make decisions based on logic, not emotion. Chapter 8 closes with a simple but powerful insight. Don't fight the trend. Understand it and let it work for you. Investors who read the forces of the market early move with grace. Those who ignore them collide with reality. Only by thinking like Newton can you become the kind of investor who sees opportunity before others even notice the movement. Chapter 9. Ask Father Time. Chapter 9 revolves around one of Rich Dad's most profound lessons. Time is the most powerful force in investing. It can be your greatest ally or your harshest enemy, depending on whether you understand how it works. Markets may rise and fall, opportunities may appear and disappear, but time is always moving, and those who know how to use it gain an unstoppable advantage. When I was younger, I believed speed was everything. I wanted fast results, fast profits, fast success. Rich Dad warned me that this mindset made me vulnerable. He said, if you think you're busy now, wait until life piles even more on your shoulders. If you don't make time to learn investing today, you'll have even less time tomorrow. I didn't appreciate those words until later in life when I realized that people don't lose financially because markets are cruel. They lose because they start too late, learn too slowly, and quit too early. Rich Dad taught me that successful investing relies on 3 forces of time: patience, habits, and compounding. Most people fail not because they pick the wrong investments, but because they lack patience. They abandon strategies too soon, react emotionally to market swings, or constantly search for something better. Meanwhile, time rewards those who build solid habits, consistent saving, continuous investing, and disciplined learning. Even small actions, repeated over years, grow into massive results. Another key insight in this chapter is that time exposes the difference between cash flow investors and capital gains investors. Capital gains investors depend heavily on unpredictable market movements. If the market turns against them, time works as a multiplier of losses. Cash flow investors, however, earn money day after day, month after month. Their assets produce income regardless of market conditions, and time amplifies the stability and strength of these income streams. Rich Dad explained that time also separates reality from opinion. In the short term, markets behave wildly, influenced by fear, excitement, news, and speculation. But in the long run, only real value, cash flow, productivity, and usefulness survives. That's why he encouraged me to focus on investments rooted in real performance rather than hype. Time eventually corrects inflated prices, exposes weak companies, and rewards solid, cash-producing assets. One of the greatest challenges for most investors is that life itself becomes an obstacle. As responsibilities grow, families, jobs, bills, debts, people delay investing. But every year of delay increases the mountain they must climb later. Rich Dad emphasized that time is either working for you or against you, but it never stands still. The sooner you start learning, investing, and building systems of cash flow, the more powerfully time will accelerate your wealth. By the end of the chapter, I came to understand why Rich Dad called time the ultimate partner. It never demands a salary, never takes a day off, and never stops multiplying your gains if you put it to work. But if you ignore it, time becomes unforgiving. It magnifies your procrastination, your mistakes, and your lack of preparation. Chapter 9 closes with a timeless truth. You don't win the money game by being the fastest. You win by working with time, not against it. When you align your actions with the force of time, building habits, focusing on cash flow, learning continuously, wealth becomes inevitable. Chapter 10. 4 Reasons Why Most People Cannot Become Powerful Investors. Chapter 10 opens with a difficult truth. Everyone has the potential to invest, but very few become powerful investors. According to Rich Dad, the difference has little to do with money, luck, or intelligence. It has everything to do with mindset. 4 psychological barriers, not financial ones, prevent most people from ever rising to the level of a sophisticated, high-influence investor. The first barrier is the power of the words, "I can't." My real father often said, "We can't afford it," while Rich Dad banned such phrases entirely. Instead, he insisted on asking, "How can I afford it?" That one shift, from conclusion to question, creates a massive difference in thinking. "I can't" shuts down creativity and learning. "How can I" opens the mind and invites solutions. Rich Dad taught me that the rich don't always start with money, but they always start with the right questions. The second barrier is the desire for ease. Most people want simple answers, quick paths, and minimal effort. Yet, as Rich Dad reminded me, money flows to those who make life easier for others, not to those seeking an easy life for themselves. Becoming a powerful investor requires enduring the early challenges, learning new concepts, overcoming fears, making mistakes, and building real financial intelligence. Those who quit early or avoid discomfort never move past the beginner stage. The third barrier is the fear of appearing stupid. Rich Dad explained that no one can learn something new, especially something as complex as investing, without at some point feeling confused or vulnerable. But many people protect their ego more than their future. They avoid opportunities because they fear looking foolish, asking dumb questions, or admitting what they don't know. Powerful investors do the opposite. They embrace not knowing, learn aggressively, and grow from every mistake. The third barrier is the unwillingness to pay the price. Everything valuable in life has a cost: time, money, effort, discipline, or temporary discomfort. Most people want the rewards of investing without paying the price of education, practice, or risk management. They want guarantees, shortcuts, and safety nets. But, as Rich Dad warned, you pay a much higher price later if you refuse to pay the small price up front. The school of hard knocks always charges interest. Throughout the chapter, Rich Dad emphasized that these four barriers are internal, not external. Markets, governments, tax laws, or wealthy elites are not what hold most people back. Instead, people hold themselves back by clinging to limiting beliefs, avoiding discomfort, protecting their pride, and refusing to invest in their own growth. By the end of the chapter, I understood Rich Dad's key message. Powerful investing begins in the mind, not in the wallet. If you can overcome "I can't," push through the desire for ease, accept the discomfort of learning, and willingly pay the price of wisdom, you open the door to a level of investing most people never reach. The journey starts not with money, but with mastering yourself. Chapter 11: The Power of Power Investing. Chapter 11 opens by contrasting ordinary investing with what Rich Dad called power investing. Most people think investing means putting money into the stock market, diversifying, waiting for prices to rise, and hoping for the best. But Rich Dad explained that powerful investors operate in a completely different world, a world where they control assets, use leverage intelligently, and accelerate the movement of money rather than leaving it parked. The first major distinction Rich Dad highlighted is control. Ordinary investors hand their money to mutual fund managers, financial advisors, or corporations. They invest in things they cannot influence. Power investors, by contrast, seek investments where they maintain some degree of control: businesses, real estate, private deals, or assets they can improve. Control reduces risk and increases opportunity. Without control, you're at the mercy of the market. The second principle is leverage. Most people fear leverage because they associate it with danger. Rich Dad argued that leverage becomes dangerous only in the hands of the uneducated. In the hands of a trained investor, leverage becomes a force multiplier, a way to do more with less, to grow faster while still protecting capital. Banks, governments, and major corporations all use leverage strategically. Power investors simply adopt the same principles on a personal scale. A third cornerstone of power investing is understanding the speed of money. Ordinary investors place money somewhere and leave it there, locked away in retirement accounts, long-term plans, or static portfolios. Powerful investors move money rapidly. They put capital into a deal, recover their original investment quickly, and then redeploy that capital into the next opportunity while still retaining ownership of the first asset. This creates a compounding effect that far outpaces traditional investing. Rich Dad also stressed the importance of understanding tax advantages. He reminded me that the tax code was written to encourage behaviors that stimulate the economy, building businesses, providing housing, creating jobs. Power investors use these incentives to accelerate wealth, while ordinary investors unknowingly fight against the tax system by relying on heavily taxed earned income and savings. Another theme in this chapter is creating value instead of waiting for value. Ordinary investors hope assets will appreciate. Power investors force appreciation. They improve properties, grow businesses, restructure deals, or negotiate terms that instantly create equity. Their wealth isn't dependent on perfect market timing, it's rooted in their ability to increase the value of what they control. By the end of the chapter, I understood that power investing isn't about being reckless or aggressive. It's about being educated, strategic, and proactive. It's about playing the game at a higher level by understanding the mechanics behind money, leverage, taxes, and control. Rich Dad emphasized that anyone can buy stocks, but it takes knowledge and discipline to become a power investor. Chapter 11 closes with a clear message. True wealth belongs to those who know how to create it, not to those who simply wait for it. Power investors don't rely on luck or market trends. They build wealth by mastering control, leverage, and the speed of money. Chapter 12: Gambling or Investing. Chapter 12 begins with the blunt truth Rich Dad wanted me to face. Most people who think they are investing are actually gambling. They buy assets they don't understand, based on tips they can't verify, in markets they can't control, and they hope everything turns out well. Hope, Rich Dad reminded me, is the most dangerous strategy in the financial world. Rich Dad explained that the difference between a gambler and an investor is not the investment itself, but the process and discipline behind the decision. A true investor knows exactly why he is entering a deal, what conditions will make him exit, and how to recover his initial capital quickly. A gambler knows only one thing: how to put money in. He rarely knows how or when to take money out. To illustrate this, I recalled a heartbreaking story from a radio show. A couple had accumulated $2 million during the booming markets of the late 1990s. Confident in the advice of their financial planner, they stayed fully invested even as warning signs appeared. When the market crashed in 2000, their advisor urged them to hold for the long term. They held and watched $2 million shrink to almost nothing. They were not investors, they were gamblers who stayed at the table far too long. Rich Dad taught me that professional investors play by different rules. A gambler leaves his money on the table, exposed to every fluctuation. A professional investor treats his initial capital like a soldier. It must return home safely. That's why Rich Dad insisted on recovering the original investment as early as possible. Once the capital is out, whatever remains in the deal is house money, similar to a professional gambler playing with winnings instead of savings. This principle of rapid capital recovery is one of the foundations of sophisticated investing. Another important lesson in this chapter is that markets move in predictable cycles, just like games in a casino. There are periods when odds are favorable and periods when they are not. A gambler plays continuously, regardless of conditions. A professional investor participates selectively, waiting patiently for the right moment. The crowd rarely understands these cycles, which is why they rush in too late and flee too late. Timing is not about guessing the future, it's about recognizing patterns and respecting market rhythms. Rich Dad also emphasized that gamblers rely on emotion, fear, greed, excitement, while investors rely on logic, analysis, and strategy. Gamblers listen to hot tips, media noise, and the enthusiasm of the herd. Investors study cash flow, risk, leverage, and exits. They know that a good investment is not defined by hype or short-term games, but long-term stability and calculated control. By the end of the chapter, Rich Dad made one point unmistakably clear: if you do not know how to take money off the table, you are gambling, not investing. Real investors manage risk before seeking reward. Gamblers chase reward while ignoring risk. Chapter 12 concludes by urging every aspiring investor to choose which game they want to play. Investing is a disciplined craft. Gambling is emotional guessing. The moment you learn to protect your capital, recognize market cycles, and act with strategy instead of hope, you stop playing the gambler's game and start playing the investor's game. Chapter 13: How to Find Great Investments. Chapter 13 opens with one of Rich Dad's most empowering insights. Great investments are not found by luck. They are found by prepared minds. Most people see opportunities only when everyone else sees them, which usually means they're already too late. But great investors train themselves to notice what the average person overlooks. Rich Dad explained that the first rule in finding great investments is to stop following the crowd. When the masses rush towards something, it's usually no longer a bargain. The best opportunities rarely exist where the spotlight shines. They exist in overlooked corners, in misunderstood markets, and in situations where others see problems instead of potential. He then taught me the second rule: great investments often come from solving someone else's problem. When people face financial pressure, divorce, illness, debt, or business challenges, they may need to sell quickly. A true investor doesn't exploit their pain. He provides a solution. Many of my best deals came from stepping in when someone needed relief. A win for them, a win for me. The third principle is to look for opportunities during economic downturns. Most people fear recessions, but Rich Dad saw them as clearance sales. When fear grips the market, prices drop well below real value. Those who have cash flow, discipline, and courage can acquire assets at discounts the crowd will only dream of later. Rich Dad also taught me to observe changes in the world: political shifts, technological advancements, demographic transitions, cultural evolutions. These forces shape entire industries. New technologies create fortunes while destroying outdated businesses. Population movements dictate where housing booms occur. Policy changes open new investment categories. Great investors study these forces like meteorologists study weather patterns. Another key insight in this chapter is the importance of understanding cycles, the 20-year, 10-year, and 5-year rhythms Rich Dad frequently referenced. While cycles aren't perfectly predictable, they help investors anticipate where opportunities will emerge. Those who ignore cycles become victims of them. Those who understand cycles profit from them. Rich Dad also emphasized the role of relationships. Many extraordinary investments come through networks, partners, advisors, friends, or other investors who trust your character and skill. When people know you are serious, disciplined, and capable, they bring opportunities to you before they reach the open market. In the world of great investing, who you know is often as important as what you know. Finally, Rich Dad introduced a counterintuitive rule. Sometimes paying a higher price is the smartest move. Bargain hunting can cost you time, delay growth, or cause you to miss strategic opportunities. In certain situations, especially when control, speed, or long-term value is at stake, paying a premium makes the investment safer and more profitable. By the end of the chapter, I understood that great investments are not discovered by chance. They are uncovered by people who think differently, prepare relentlessly, and act decisively. Rich Dad's lessons revealed that opportunity is everywhere, but only those trained to see it and courageous enough to pursue it truly benefit. Chapter 13 closes with a simple reality. Great investments are created by intelligence, courage, and preparation, not luck. Chapter 14. How to become a great investor. Chapter 14 opens with Rich Dad's reminder that great investors are not born, they are trained. Becoming exceptional in the world of investing does not come from luck, timing, or simply choosing the right stock. It comes from developing the right mindset, mastering key principles, and building habits that allow you to make consistently wise decisions even when the world is uncertain. One of the first lessons Rich Dad emphasized was the difference between facts, opinions, and principles. Facts are numbers: cash flow, expenses, assets, liabilities. Opinions are what people think: forecasts, tips, predictions, hype. Principles are the unchanging laws of money. Cash flow is king, debt can be a tool, and control reduces risk. Most investors fail because they confuse opinions with facts, or because they ignore the principles that protect them. Great investors rely on facts and respect the principles, no matter how loud the opinions become. Rich Dad also stressed that cash flow is the foundation of great investing. Many amateurs chase capital gains, waiting for prices to rise. But great investors build wealth through assets that generate consistent income. Cash flow provides stability, reduces emotional decision-making, and allows an investor to endure downturns. Price appreciation becomes a bonus, not the plan. When you invest for cash flow, time becomes your ally, and volatility becomes less threatening. Another crucial skill is filtering information. We live in a world flooded with financial noise, news headlines, social media chatter, sensational predictions, and conflicting advice. Rich Dad insisted that a great investor must learn what to ignore. Most information is designed to sell something or trigger emotion, not to educate. Great investors look past the noise and focus only on data that relates to fundamentals, trends, and risk. Patience and discipline form another cornerstone of this chapter. Rich Dad explained that ordinary investors chase every opportunity that looks exciting. Great investors wait for the right opportunity, one that fits their criteria and aligns with their understanding. They don't let fear push them into selling too early, and they don't let greed pull them into buying too late. Their decisions are driven by logic, not emotion. Rich Dad also revealed that every great investor must practice continuously. You cannot become great by reading books alone. You become great by analyzing deals, running numbers, making mistakes, and learning from the outcomes. Errors are not failures, they are tuition. Great investors embrace this process while amateurs fear it. Another important part of becoming a great investor is developing the ability to see what others miss. This requires creativity, curiosity, and the willingness to question conventional wisdom. When others say, "That can't be done," great investors ask, "How can it be done?" They find value in distressed assets, hidden markets, overlooked opportunities, and unconventional strategies. Their success comes not from following the crowd, but from understanding what the crowd cannot see. Chapter 14 ends with Rich Dad's powerful reminder: great investing is a lifelong journey. It requires continuous learning, emotional strength, and an unwavering commitment to improvement. When you combine discipline, knowledge, cash flow focus, and the willingness to think differently, you begin the transformation from a casual investor into a truly great one. Chapter 15, Conclusion: Winners and Losers. Chapter 15 closes the book with a direct and sobering insight. Everyone participates in the money game, but not everyone wins. What determines whether someone becomes a financial winner or loser is not income, background, or luck. It is mindset, behavior, and personal responsibility. Rich Dad begins by pointing out a fundamental divide. Losers blame circumstances, markets, governments, or bad advice, while winners look inward. Winners aren't free from mistakes, they simply learn from them. Losers repeat their mistakes because they refuse to take responsibility for their decisions. Rich Dad stressed that the moment you blame someone else for your financial situation, you give away your power to change it. A major theme in this chapter is the ability to manage information. In today's world, financial information is everywhere, but much of it is wrong, biased, or designed to sell something. Most investors drown in noise, reacting emotionally to headlines and hype. Winners, however, develop the discipline to filter information. They distinguish between facts, opinions, and manipulation. They seek knowledge, not noise. This is one of the most important skills that separates sophisticated investors from casual ones. Rich Dad also emphasized control as the dividing line between winners and losers. Losers hand their money to others, brokers, advisors, institutions, and hope for good results. Winners insist on understanding what they invest in, how it works, and how they can influence the outcome. They control their assets, their cash flow, and their risk. They refuse to let strangers or the market dictate their future. Another theme is the importance of cash flow and leverage. Winners don't rely on paychecks or retirement accounts alone. They acquire assets that generate steady income and use leverage wisely to accelerate wealth. They understand the tax system, build businesses, and create streams of money that continue even when they sleep. Losers, by contrast, depend on earned income, the most heavily taxed and least scalable income of all. Winners build systems, losers work for systems built by others. Rich Dad makes it clear that the biggest difference between winners and losers is courage. Winners take calculated risks, ask difficult questions, and step outside their comfort zones. Losers cling to safety, familiarity, and excuses. Winners invest in their education, their relationships, and their mindset long before investing money. They treat mistakes as lessons, not defeats. The chapter ends with Rich Dad's final challenge: the choice is yours. No one is destined to be a loser. Becoming a winner requires commitment, discipline, and the willingness to think differently from the crowd. It means taking control of your finances, developing true financial intelligence, and applying the principles laid out throughout the book. Rich Dad's closing message is powerful. Financial freedom is not determined by the market, it is determined by you. Winners choose to learn, act, and grow. Losers choose to wait, hope, and blame. And in the end, the money game rewards only those who choose to play like winners.